Hello, this is Tyler, the game mechanic here, and I thought today I'd do a video on the wonders of the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions in Excel. I find myself using these all the time. Once you kind of know what they do, then you find more and more uses for them, and they're kind of one of those things that can appear a little intimidating at first, but they're actually pretty simple. So basically what they are is they're a lookup function, which means they're useful when basically you have a table of data. So from a game design standpoint, a lot of times what I'll have is like a unit table, say. So we're just going to make up a unit table here. This can be monsters. And so imagine that you're kind of designing the game. These monsters have hit points, and they've got an attack value and a defense value. Obviously, there's probably a lot more to it than that, but this will get the idea across of what you can do with the lookups. So imagine you've got some, I don't know, maggots, say. Maggots are on my mind because of what we're doing on Darkest Dungeon. Maybe some run-of-the-mill skeletons, and if there's run-of-the-mill skeletons, maybe you've got some giant skeletons. And then, well, if there's giant skeletons, there's got to be giant bats. Everybody knows that. So, for example, maggots, low hit points. I'm just going to be putting in numbers here. Not really spending a lot of time thinking about the design here. Attack, well, maggots probably aren't attacking that well. We'll just go on a scale of 100, say. Skeletons do okay. Giant skeletons are tougher. I don't know, giant bats. Maggots probably not defending all that well. Skeletons get in the middle. Maybe giant skeletons have good attack, but defense is the same. And I don't know, giant bats defend really well. They're hard to hit. So here we go. We've got our basic unit table that we could add to later. Now the use of a VLOOKUP in this case is a lot of times, so you've got this table, then maybe on another sheet you have some sort of calculator or simulator. This is what I find myself doing a lot, because if you're testing your game mechanics, then often you want kind of a worksheet to be able to test those, but your database is elsewhere. So here I could say I'm going to enter in the name of a unit, which I'll explain in a minute, and then I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. But it's useful to have IDs. So I'm going over here and I'm going to give these each a unique integer ID. And the reason for that is it's a lot easier to look up a sorted table by ascending ID than it is, say, to look up the name maggots. So here I'm going to look up this ID. So I go right to the VLOOKUP, which V means vertical. It means you are interested in looking at a table that is sorted by in the vertical direction here. So in other words, each row is a different unit, maggots, skeletons, etc. If you had a table that was arranged the opposite way, with your IDs going across the top, and then you had maggots, skeletons, etc., then that would be, you'd use HLOOKUP. But let me show you here. So VLOOKUP, you just start typing it in. If you haven't done a lot of formulas in Excel, the nice thing is you can always get help. So as soon as you start to enter the formula, it's going to tell you what the input parameters should be for that. A lot of times this is pretty cryptic though, and you'll look at it and say, okay. Like for example, if you don't know what VLOOKUP really does, then this doesn't really help you any. So the best thing to do there is just get help. You can either click on this function button here, or just click the name of the function. So VLOOKUP here is going to tell you some stuff of how to use it. A lot of times this can be bewildering as well until you go to an example, and then this starts to make sense. But I'm going to sort of walk you through here what it does. So the first thing is, what are you going to look up? So we've entered this ID, we're going to look up that value. Then you always separate your arguments by commas. Next thing is, okay, what table are you going to look up in? So you go over here and you select your table of information. Always start with that first column, the ID column, and go all the way to the end of whatever your table is. Then a comma again. Then what are you going to look up? So we know we're looking up ID 1, but what do we want to return rather? So in this case, hypothetically, let's return the hit point value here. So now you just want to give the column number what that is. It always starts here, column 1, 2, 3. So hit points are in column 3, so I want to return the hit points. And then the last parameter is kind of a tricky one with the lookup functions. It's just a true-false value that determines whether you want to look up for an exact match or an approximate match. Most of the time, you're going to want exact match, meaning if you're looking up ID 1, you want to return ID 1. If for some reason there wasn't an ID 1 and you wanted to do approximate, that can sometimes get you into trouble by returning something you don't realize you're returning. For example, if you were trying to look up 1.5 and you had approximate match on, then basically what would happen is it'll give you one of those two things, but you might not actually want that. I find exact match, which is the false parameter, will let you know if that wasn't found. So let's check this out. It'll make sense. So this is your input ID, and here is the returned hit points. So let's test this guy out. One thing I do in my spreadsheets is I always color the input cells blue, just because that helps me tell that's something I'm supposed to mess with. Obviously the color doesn't matter, but for me I've been using blue since the dawn of time, so blue it is. Light baby blue to be precise here. So if I input that ID, it returns the hit points. Or I can change the ID and now it returns the hit points of skeletons. So usually what I have is I have something going on like this, where I want to actually return all the parts of this monster, and so therefore I'm going to want to use a VLOOKUP for each of these things. Now one thing is, once you've gone through the trouble of entering this stuff, sometimes you don't want to re-enter it every time. So one useful thing here is to use your reference parameters, the dollar signs. And if you're not familiar with dollar signs, I should do another video on that, but basically it helps tell you whether, if you drag that formula around, whether you want those to kind of smart update. In other words, if you drag this formula one cell to the right, do you want those to smart update to the right, or do you want to keep it as an absolute reference? In this case, the table that we're looking up shouldn't change. So if to save time, if I drag this formula over, for example, I want to make sure that the table portion of it doesn't change, and that's working correctly. Now, of course, the rest is all messed up, and I'll explain that. If we want to pass in the same lookup parameter, in other words, we're looking up the ID B8, then if I drag this over, you'll see that that becomes C8 because I hadn't put a dollar sign in front of it. Anyway, that's really probably a separate video, so maybe actually I'll just cut to the chase of the VLOOKUP since that's what we're talking about. I want to look up that ID in this table, and in this case I want to return the name, which is column 2. And once again I want an exact match, so I'm going to put the false parameter in. False, I never remember that. I have to look it up every time. In fact, so I'll just demonstrate what I normally do here. I'm going to look up that number in this table, and I know I want column 4, and then I'm like, oh man, which is which again? So I click here, scroll down, range lookup. If true or omitted, an approximate match is returned. Like I said earlier, I usually don't want that. False would return an exact match. So then I say, okay, I want false. And despite the fact I've been doing this for 20 years or something, I can never remember which one is which unless I've used VLOOKUP earlier that day. And that's just because my memory is crap. So I give myself hints. Okay, there we go. And finally, let's complete this with looking at that value in this table. Column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and false. Ta-da! Okay, now this seems like an awful lot of work just to repeat the information that I've already got over here. But this is a really simple example. Usually what's going on is there's this massive table somewhere else with, say, 100 monsters in it. And I want to be able to quickly reference that information, for whatever reason. I'll show you an actual example here in just a sec. And so this is great because now I can just change one number, and I can return all the info from those monsters. So yeah, let me go show you an actual example. This was for a game I did a while ago. I've hopefully sanitized most of the sheet here, at least part of the sheet. And this was a combat calculator for a tactics game that I made. And in this case, the spreadsheet is ugly as sin, but there's a unit table over here, which is massive and huge, but was really useful. So here's this master unit table. As you can see, I've got tons of units in here, each with its own everything defined, attack values, strength values, all that. So what I wanted to be able to do is simulate combats via spreadsheet here, so that I could see what would happen. This was kind of just to help with the design. So in this case, what I've done is I've set up some worksheet controls here so that I can pick a unit. So in this case, say archers, and archers are going to fight. What are they going to fight? How about scout cavalry? Now, what's happening behind the scenes is this worksheet control just generates a number, and that number is looking up on the unit table. So, for example, here is a VLOOKUP in action. So it's looking up the ID, which is behind this worksheet control in C4, and then it looks at that massive unit table and it returns cell 4. Now in this, or column 4. In this case, I actually did an omitted or an approximate match. As long as you're careful, that won't get you into trouble, but kind of like I was saying earlier, if I was doing this today, I would probably just make sure to do an exact match to be careful. Then similar, here's some VLOOKUPs to give me the attack strength and the defense strengths, and does it for the other unit also. I even included the ability like, oh, we're fighting in the mountains or the hills. And basically a series of VLOOKUPs, are grabbing everything, and it's calculating, and this tells me that my archers attacking scout cavalry is going to result, and they both start at 100 health, it's going to result in 66 and 51. Now if the scout cavalry were in a place that they couldn't attack back, I can toggle this guy off, and this makes sense, it's a ranged unit attacking. So basically he's going to do 49 damage to the defender and be left pristine because they couldn't attack in that case back. So this is an example of basically how VLOOKUPs can be put into place. There's a million other uses for them, so maybe this probably wasn't the clearest video, but I'd be happy to do another one. I find them, like I said at the beginning, once you kind of know what they do, then you start using them all the time. And anytime you've got a table of information that you want to return specific info on in sort of an automated way, then that works. And I have gotten into conditions where I've done VLOOKUPs inside of VLOOKUPs or VLOOKUPs inside of HLOOKUPs, and they're kind of weird to look at, but honestly, once you get used to the function, it's not that bad. So if you got any questions, post them in the comments. I'd love to. This is just something new I'm trying out. I kind of want to couple some systems or technical advice with a specific design problem and use some examples of stuff I've done in the past. So thanks for watching, and catch you on the next one.